Hello everybody and welcome back to the Prison Productions channel. It's going to be a little while since we've done a video, but today I have an awesome plugin that I'm going to be showing you guys today. This is the Dehancer plugin review. I just realized right now why it's named Dehancer, because it dehances it instead of enhancing it. I'm an idiot. Anyway, now what this plugin does is essentially it's a film emulator. So it will basically replicate the look and the feel of like old-fashioned film, and it does it with a very advanced sort of computing and filters. It's not like your standard drag and drop overlay. Like, it actually does some very technical, high level computations with these things, and a lot of it even goes over my head. But you can go into deep detail in the blog and the informations inside of it. Now personally, what caught my eye right here was the film grain effect. Clicking on this right here, you can see the film grain effect there's a very noticeable quality change. It looks better than like a standard overlay that I would just drag and drop over my footage. It definitely reacts to the actual footage a lot better in different ways than I've really seen. Along with that, there's like bloom effect, film profiles, and a lot of stuff that I'm going to be showing you right now. So let's jump right into it. So I got it set up right here inside Davinci Resolve. I got a few different clips right here. We're just going to go ahead and start with this city scene right here. So as I said before, this is a very advanced and complicated program and plugin. So if you want to go really in depth, go onto their blog and their website, because they have a lot of information on how to get into the deep nitty-gritty of this stuff. As for me, I'm going to be giving you guys a quick overview of it so you can kind of just get up and running with it really fast. So basically, once we come in here, let's close a few things out, give us some room here, open up our node editor, and we're going to go ahead, open VFX, and scroll down to the very bottom where our emulator basically will appear. Now all you got to do is just drag this in as a basic node, and as soon as you connect it in, you're going to see that it automatically will apply a film profile to it. So looking at the settings here, we'll just keep our input settings for the same right now, just for demonstration purposes. But we have our film profiles here, which basically will emulate very specific. You can see there's a huge amount of different ones. If you want to emulate a very specific film camera or film profile, you can find it right here. And if you put that in, as you can see, there's a lot of different kind of presets that we can work with. Some of them are more overexposed, some of them are more contrasty, while others are more flat. And I'm gonna look around until we find just one that I like. I don't know any of these by heart, so right now it's a little bit of a guessing game right now. Ooh, I like that one. I like that one a lot. And there we go. Now the one thing is, there's the push and pull here. Now basically, from what I understood from the website, they have 3 different versions of each profile. One that is very high contrasted, which if you bring that up, you can see it has a lot more of a deeper effect to our colors. And if we bring this down, it'll flatten the tone as well. And that's what our push and pull does. It blends between those profiles rather than just kind of doing an opacity fade or like basically decreasing the actual effect. It actually basically, they have 3 different versions that they blend between, which makes it a lot more accurate. So that's pretty cool. We're gonna go ahead and ramp it up just a little bit. The next things that we have in our settings here, I'm going to be going through each of these one by one. That being said, let's go ahead and disable all the other ones so we can look at these one by one. So we're going to start by looking at our expand, print, and color head. These are all kind of similar sort of a color and exposure, basically correction pieces that we can use right here. Now, the way that Dehancer websites describes this is essentially analog corrections for digital footage here. So basically this will all be run through slightly different than our main color wheels and our main exposure sliders and everything. This will be based on more of a physical and sort of print-like correction to our footage. So it will basically emulate, I'm going to be saying emulate a lot here, it's a great word, to basically emulate the real life sort of effects and imperfections that will occur by applying these types of corrections to our footage. So as you can see, we can adjust our black point and our white point, which is very useful. Let's try to keep those relative. Let's just reset those. I don't want to mess with anything too bad right there. You can also change your color mode from normal to luma. So you also have access to changing your exposure, tonal contrast control as well as your color density and saturation as well. The fun stuff that I really like is the color head right here. Now, the color heads are very similar to some of your corrections over here, like in your primary color wheels here. But like I said, this is more of a physical-based correction here. So from what I could understand from the blog, this will basically add some minor imperfections that will actually, instead of just changing one channel when you're doing a color correction, it will slightly impact some of the other channels, which is more realistic to what would happen in an analog scenario. So we can basically adjust like our yellow blue right here to bring in some of our blue tones here, or pull them away and get some of our yellow here. So we can kind of give it like a dark, like, I don't know, what am I thinking of, a warmer tint. Give it a little magenta and cyan, and we just have a really warm kind of tinted color right there. Now a great way to actually show this in a way that's meaningful, because it's kind of hard to tell within Davinci Resolve, is to look in their demonstrations here. Look at your scopes here. So this would be doing a blue shift, adding a little bit of a blue tint to our gradient map right here, and as you can see, it adds a little bit of blue. And if you look at our scopes right here, all of our colors remain consistent. However, if you come over to adding it with the Dehancer subtractive methods, will actually affect multiple channels. As you can see, you have a slight offset right here, and actually shift a few of your other tones to make it more realistic. But enough about color, let's get to the exciting stuff, film grain. Now, I love this. This is personally my, I love this because I could tell right off the bat, let me disable a few of these things, that the film grain was so much better than like anything else that I had used before. It's just, I don't know exactly what it does, but it's noticeable in the fact that it just looks so much more realistic. So in order to really demonstrate this, before I do anything else, why don't we just go ahead and like go into our library, and let's just add a serial node. Let's see, add node corrector. There we go. And let's just add, if we search on the top here, what is it called? Grain. Here's some film grain. All right, let's drag it onto our footage right here. Now let's go ahead, for the sake of this demonstration, let's like bring up the opacity. Let's bring up the texture, grain size. Let's shrink it down a little bit and just make it super noticeable as much as we can for both ends, and grain strength. There we go. Okay, so like let's look at our grain right there. So if we kind of play this through, we have grain applied to it, but it looks pretty. I mean, like, let's look at it. It kind of just looks really fake. It's just an overlay, right? One thing that we can do is bring up the saturation, which kind of helps sometimes, but still doesn't look that great. Now, let's look at the Dehancer plugin, though. I'm sorry, I'm really excited about this. So what I'm going to do, can I remember how to do this? Right-click, grab still. All right, let's grab a still here and pull that into our gallery. And let's compare the two. So let me go ahead and just delete that right there. Delete this node, since we have our still captured, and let me just make some space here. We're running out of real estate. Anyways, let's come over here, and now let's go back over to our film grain and just enable it. Now if we zoom in, as you can see, it's not too noticeable right now, but why don't we bring up the amount quite a bit, and the film resolution. So the film resolution, this will essentially kind of blur the base footage. As you can see, if I bring this all the way up, it's much more crisp. If I bring it down, this will basically heavily blur parts of your footage. So I would just kind of like, I'd give it a little bit of a blur just to make it more realistic. The other thing is you can affect the noise, the grain of your shadows, midtones, and highlights, and chroma all individually, which is really cool and gives you a lot of control over this. But that's not enough. Right away, you can see right off the bat, this is a lot better than what we had before. But let's pull up our comparison image right here. And as you can see, so on the right side, we have our generic Davinci Resolve built-in grain overlay. This is just an overlay. But on the left right here, you can see this is the actual plugin, Dehancer. And you can see that this is just a lot better. If we zoom out, it looks really realistic. Like, it looks solid. And I think it really shines when you're looking at the buildings right here. Because the buildings in the background, this is a really noisy place. There's a lot of different kind of pixel variation, a lot of different things going on. You have different house sizes and a lot of things rather than like a big open area up front on the road here. And I think that's where this really shows through, because you can see it breaks it up in a way that this overlay simply does not. If I were to affect some of these settings here, let's bring up the size, because like if I were to pull up the size a lot, this will make it a lot easier to kind of compare between the two. You can see that it's just affecting it in a way that doesn't seem out of touch, and it doesn't seem very crazy. If I bring up the chroma here, we'll get a lot more color out of it. Sorry, yeah, I may have described the chroma wrong. This will bring in more saturation. And as you can see, it looks a lot better in the fact that it affects it in a way that reacts to the actual footage rather than just being in the shadows and the highlights. I can't really describe it, but I just know it looks a lot more realistic than this overlay. And let me go ahead and bring this out. Let's go over to the next one, which is, how do I say that? Halation. Halation. First try. All right, perfect. So Halation right here. Now this is essentially another really cool that I like. If I were to enable it, as you can see, it's a little bit of like a chromatic kind of like RGB channel split, but it's a lot more dynamic than just splitting your RGB channel or trying to replicate this on your own, because as you can see, it's affected by only like the highlights areas. As you can see, like on the road and stuff, it's not as noticeable, and it's very dynamic with actual lighting and colors of your footage. Nothing's really happening out of the green channels here. It looks like it's very realistic in the fact that it's reacting to more of the whiter areas and the more brighter areas of our footage, rather than just kind of affecting everything as a whole. And if I bring this up, the source limiter here, this will affect kind of the intensity of it, which we can kind of bring it down, but actually keeping it like that will basically keep it at, this will basically affect like the white area. So if we want to like limit it, I bring it up more, and that will limit how much of the white areas and the brighter parts of the image it will take. A great way to actually look at this is masked mode. As you can see, it will highlight everything in our footage, and we can actually do a quick outline and visually see how this is affecting our footage. Another thing is our background gain. So as you can see, this will kind of bring down some of the black areas and more of the flatter areas rather than just the edges being so brighter. So if we want to bring down basically the brightness of some of the flatter areas, we can bring that down and leave our brighter areas to be more prominent. Now let's turn off our mask mode so we can kind of see this a little bit better. Smoothness, pretty self-explanatory. It's just going to kind of smooth it out. As you can see, I kind of like it pretty sharp. Local diffusion, that's going to give it a lot more diffusion in our hot spots where we're having the actual how do you say that again? Halation? Halation, where we have our halation here. But if we want to do the global diffusion, that's going to affect the entire thing and give it the entire footage sort of an orange tint, as you can see, which I kind of like. Let's go ahead and bring down our local diffusion though. That's a lot. And along with the amplify, we'll actually, rather than just kind of affecting the diffusion, this is just going to bring up the actual halation effect, so it's just brighter and more contrasty. And the cool thing is you can actually change the hue of this, so we can give it more of a really dark red, which I don't want. I'm going to give it kind of a warmer tone right there, and it's looking really cool and I like it. The blue compact, I'm not entirely sure what this does. I don't know if turning on the mask is going to help me. I can see there's a little bit of a blue tint that kind of comes in if I see that. But other than that, I'm not entirely sure how that affects the footage. And the impact was just an overall kind of more of an opacity slider. On to the next thing, the bloom. I love bloom. So as you can see, if I turn that on, in the exact same highlight areas, we're going to get some kind of light bloom, which we all kind of know how bloom works. But this is somewhat hard to emulate as well, because mostly whenever we try to do this, I'm sure you've tried to do this before. You've kind of put like a glow effect over your footage, and it looks really weird. But using this one, as you can see, it kind of gets the whiter areas, and it gets the physically brighter areas a lot more than just grabbing white areas in general. Because if I just throw a glow effect over this, sometimes it'll just blow out my whole footage, and it just looks really unrealistic. But this kind of can decipher a little bit more what areas need to be more highlighted realistically and what don't. So with sliders in this section here, we have our highlights, which is pretty obvious, along with another source limiter, which will kind of bring down that overall. If we bring up our mask mode, as you can see, it will kind of bring down the source of how much it affects of your footage, while the highlights will kind of just change how specifically it gets the real hot spots. Now our details and stuff will kind of basically get a little bit more of a crispness to it. So if we want to bring down our details, it's kind of going to fuzz it up, but we can bring up our details to sort of get some more definition in our bloom here. Diffusion is going to obviously diffuse and kind of scatter the light a lot more. I'm going to kind of leave that. Let's get a little bit some sharp lighting there. And of course, amplify, as you can see, is just going to make your thing glow a lot stronger. Save lights is similar to amplify, but it can help. Basically, if you bring this up, it will kind of decrease the bloom so you don't get some clipping if you're doing some more editing later down the line. So just kind of bring your values down. That way you're not overexposing your lights. And saturation, we won't be able to see that in this footage. And wow, look at what we've done. We have just blown this thing up. Saturation, we can kind of bring this down. Might want to hit that impact slider, which is like our opacity, to bring that all the way down. But probably not the best grade here, but a great showcase of example. Anyways, let's bring that down, and of course go to a vignette. You know how a vignette works, easy to use. Just enable this, and we got a little bit of a kind of an edge glow. If you bring down the feather, I was watching another review, had a great tip. Bring the feather all the way down so you can actually see where the vignette is, and we can kind of make our settings here. Before we actually put it into effect, we can kind of see that now we have it positioned how we want, and then bring our feather back up. And there we go. Now we have a big heavy vignette here. We can just keep that on. Film breath is basically, this is harder to demonstrate because I have a low frame rate when you're trying to compute this. This is a very heavy plugin because it's computing a lot of different things each frame. But essentially this will basically create changes in exposure and tint each frame, which is basically trying to replicate like a natural variation that you would get with an actual film footage. So you can bring up our period, which is how often it happens, but if we go ahead and just play this through by itself, let's zoom in a little bit. Let's go ahead and let's bring this back to the front, and just for the sake of example, let's bring up our exposure a lot, our tonal contrast, and our color. So it's going to vary between it's going to do between our period times. It's going to be shifting from the exposure, tonal contrast, and color. It's going to be impacting all of those values. So if we play that through, it's going to become pretty noticeable. As you can see, we have this weird color variation that is quite smoother than other things that I've used. I can bring it all the way up if we want to become super noticeable. And as you can see, it's just kind of changing our color shifts each frame. But of course you want to keep this on a much smaller level to make it more realistic, which I can see it right here. I don't know if you can notice through the compression of this footage once we get it onto YouTube, but it's pretty noticeable in the fact of just the really subtle hue shifts and exposure shifts they have definitely seen in older movies and other places. Let's go back to this. And right alongside with this, in a very similar fashion, is our gate weave. Now, this does the exact same thing, but in transform. So this will actually warp your footage, as you can see, just clicked on it. You warp your footage in the way that basically running it through a film camera would. If I go ahead and play this through, you can see that there's a slight, if we zoom in quite a bit, and let's maybe go over to one of our corners here and play this through, you can see we got a very subtle kind of variation in how our footage is actually moving. Let me just loop this. So as you can see, there's slight like distortion of how it's moving. If I bring the translation X and Y up, you can see that it moves a lot more steady, but the thing is, it tries to kind of track it. So as you can see, it's not moving in it's not like your standard camera shake. It's actually trying to line up each frame, but warps it slightly, which gives you this really realistic effect that doesn't just look like it's moving around. And you can definitely tell just looking at this, it's not just moving around, it's actually warping it in a way that looks very realistic to some of the older movies that I've seen. And if we were to pull this out here and look at our full footage, I really like how it looks. Definitely don't do anything with the rotation. I don't personally think that affects it in a positive way in any way. All right. Along with that, there's also a false color tab. You can do a little level checking, make sure nothing's clipping right here, and some output slider. This is basically an opacity slider for the entire effect, which I personally never like to use any sort of opacity slider because, as you can see, it's doing with the warp effect that we have applied here. It just doesn't. Those opacity sliders never work well. If you are just doing colors, who knows? This could help you if you need to do an overall reduction of the intensity of your plugin here at the very end. But if you're doing any sort of transform effects, I never use the output here. But the last thing, there is a LUT generator. So you can actually generate a LUT here from basically all the settings that you've made here. It's not really designed for this because a lot of this is basically being computed per frame specifically for this footage. The whole point of this plugin, why it's so dynamic, why it's so large, and why it's so advanced, is the fact that it is actually trying to replicate some very scientific and very physically real effects made specifically for this footage, which you're not going to get out of the LUTs because that's a very two-dimensional, just shifting color tones, which is very different from what this plugin is trying to achieve. So you can try to make a LUT out of it, but it's just a built-in feature. It's there if you want it, but it's not really the grand scheme, I can't speak. In the grand scheme of things, it's not exactly the highlighted feature, all right? And there's plenty more that you can do within this, and there's a lot more behind the science of it if you really want to go onto the blog and look into the real estate of how much science and how much goes into each of these, so you can actually master each of these levels, each of these settings as well, and learn how to bend them to the way that you want them to affect. For people that are looking for a very advanced and high-end plugin that can recreate very, very realistic film profiles, I'd say this is it. It's really great. It has so many different features and so many different adjustments that you can make it. You can adjust very nitty-gritty options to tweak it exactly how you need it to be. That being said, it's more of a higher end plugin at around $350, but that's for the Pro version, and it's on sale right now, as of right now. But there's also, this is for the Pro version. There's a few different versions as well. There's also the Lite version. If you go to the Lite version is only $200, and that will come with basically your profiles, 60 of them, your color head, your film grain, the bloom, defringe, vignette, and false colors. Or if you really want to, you can get just specific effects if you want to buy them for the plugin. You can get this sexy, awesome film grain effect for $100, which I'm telling you, I love this. I love the film grain a lot. It looks so good. It looks so crisp. It's just not your standard overlay. I just love how it affects the footage, along with like some of your other things. But if you want to get like the bloom and the halation and the halation and the halation effects, you can get all of those individually. I'd love to bundle them all together. I kind of like them all together. It's a lot cheaper if you get them all together. But it's definitely something to look into. So I think it's something that you have to evaluate for yourself, see if you really enjoy it, and see if you want this very specific thing. If you want some high-end, very realistic film effects, this is the place to get it. So, anyways, guys, thanks for watching the review today. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We'll be getting some more videos out today. Not today. This is a video today. Some point in time, there will be a video at some point in time about something. Give me money.